Hey, John, can you hear me now?
And the press have hard copies.
Okay, Roger. Then I'm gonna continue based on that. Then, John, in the 48 hours prior to the strike, sensitive intelligence indicated that the compound at point number 1 on the map was being used by ISIS-K planners, used to facilitate future attacks. We were also receiving a significant number of reports indicating multiple avenues of attack, which were being planned simultaneously, through which ISIS-K would attempt to harm our forces, including with rockets, suicide explosive vests, and vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. In fact, in the 36 hours preceding the strike, our leaders on the ground, at the airport, and in the strike cell received more than 60 different pieces of intelligence related to imminent threats, with some intelligence corroborating and some conflicting, with events observed from our UAVs, which were flying above Kabul throughout the day. One of the most recurring aspects of the intelligence was that ISIS-K would utilize a white Toyota Corolla as a key element in the next attack. Because the compound at point number 1 was our strongest lead for this series of imminent attacks, we initiated an intense surveillance of the compound with as many as 6 MQ-9 Reapers on the morning of 29 August. At 8:52 a.m. local time on 29 August, a white Toyota Corolla arrived at point number 1, the compound we believed to be a key area of interest associated with imminent threats to the airport. 2 adult males exited the vehicle, met with an adult male in the compound, and received a bag from him. The Corolla then departed the compound heading south, and we followed the vehicle. At 9:05 a.m., the Toyota Corolla picked up a 3rd adult male carrying a bag at point number 2, and then continued south. At 9:35, the Corolla arrived at the compound at point number 3, which we now know to include an Office of Nutrition and Education International, and all 3 adult males in the vehicle entered the building on the compound. At 11:19 a.m., 3 adult males unloaded bags and jugs from the trunk of the vehicle before departing the compound at 11:22 a.m., heading south. At approximately this time, U.S. forces were notified of a sensitive intelligence collection indicating that an ISIS-K cell leader in Kabul was dropping off supplies. At 12:11 p.m., the Corolla arrived at point number 4, and at least 2 adult male occupants exited the vehicle in front of an office building before returning to their vehicle and departing at 1:27 p.m., heading west and then south. At 2:00 p.m., the Corolla returned to the compound at point number 3. Subsequently, multiple adult males were observed loading the trunk of the vehicle with items assessed at the time to be explosives, before departing at 3:47 p.m. with 4 adult males heading north. At 4:11 p.m., the Corolla returned to point number 2 and dropped off 1 adult male carrying a bag, then continued north. After driving near point number 1, the Corolla dropped off 1 adult male on the road at point number 5, which is roughly several hundred meters north of point number 1. At 4:39 p.m., the Corolla dropped off its last passenger on the road at point number 6. At 4:51 p.m., the Corolla arrived at point number 7 and backed into a compound that was approximately 3 kilometers from the airport, which was the closest it came to the airport all day. We were very concerned that the vehicle could move quickly and be at the airport boundary in a matter of moments. By this time, we had observed the vehicle for about 8 hours. While in the compound, the vehicle was observed being approached by a single adult male assessed at the time to be a co-conspirator. The strike was executed at this time because the vehicle was stationary and to reduce the potential for civilian casualties. The single Hellfire missile was fused to detonate inside the vehicle to further minimize the chance for civilian casualties. It struck the vehicle at 4:53 p.m., which produced an explosive event and follow-on flames significantly larger than a Hellfire missile would have been expected to produce. It is my assessment that leaders on the ground and the strike cell had achieved a reasonable certainty at the time of the strike to designate the vehicle as an imminent threat to U.S. forces at the airport, and that they made this self-defense strike in accordance with established rules of engagement. That assessment is based upon interviews with leaders on the ground and members of the strike cell, on a review of the intelligence available to the team at the time of the strike, and on the team's interpretation of how this vehicle and its occupants' actions were confirming the intelligence that they were seeing. It is further my assessment that the strike team were convinced at the time of the strike that the area was clear of civilians and that they had taken prudent steps in regards to weaponeering the strike to minimize the potential for civilian casualties. Finally, it is my assessment that they did believe, as reported, that there was a secondary explosion. Our investigation now concludes that the strike was a tragic mistake. First, I will stress this was not a rushed strike. The strike cell deliberately followed and observed this vehicle and its occupants for 8 hours, while cross-checking what they were seeing with all available intelligence to develop a reasonable certainty of the imminent threat that this vehicle posed to our forces. Second, while the initial reports indicated a secondary explosion, the initial investigation could only conclude that there was a possible to probable presence of external accelerants that could include either explosive material in the vehicle or an ignition of the gas tank of the vehicle. Subsequent analysis could not rule out the presence of a small amount of explosive material, but determined that the most likely cause was the ignition of gas from a propane tank located immediately behind the car. Such an ignition would have created a brief but massive fireball oriented directly up and out of the compound that was observed in the video and displayed in this photo. If we could get that next photo up, please.
They have me disabled, sir.
Finally, while the strike cell reported, John, can you hear me okay?
I got you, sir.
Roger. Finally, while the strike cell reported the presence of 2 adult males, one inside the vehicle and one outside the vehicle at the time of the strike, the cell initiated a review of their footage immediately following the report of civilian casualties and determined that a few partially obscured forms were briefly visible moving in the compound. This led to my initiation of an investigation within 24 hours of the strike. A comprehensive review of all the available footage and reporting on the matter led us to a final conclusion that as many as 10 civilians were killed in the strike, including up to 7 children. At the time of the strike, based upon all the intelligence and what was being reported, I was confident that the strike had averted an imminent threat to our forces at the airport. Based upon that assessment, I and other leaders in the department repeatedly asserted the validity of this strike. I am here today to set the record straight and acknowledge our mistakes. I will end my remarks with the same note of sincere and profound condolences to the family and friends of those who died in this tragic strike. We are exploring the possibility.
And will anybody be held responsible?
We are in the process right now of continuing that line of investigation, and I have nothing for you now because that involves personnel issues.
Please identify yourself and your outlet when you ask your question, David.
David Martin with CBS News. So you said that you started following this car after it showed up at a place associated with ISIS. In retrospect, was that place associated with ISIS? And this was described as an over-the-horizon strike, which is what the U.S. is going to be relying on from now on in Afghanistan. So what does this incident say about the reliability of future strikes against terrorist threats in Afghanistan?
Sure, David. So I'll take the first part of your question and begin with that. So point 1 on the map, we do assess very definitely associated with ISIS-K. In fact, a little less than 24 hours later, rockets will be launched from that point against the airfield. So we had very good intelligence to make us think point 1 on the map was in fact an area where ISIS was centered. So I think that was a very good intelligence supported that belief. Now, the second part of your question about whether this will affect future OTH operations. Let me be clear. This was a self-defense strike taken under self-defense rules of engagement based on an imminent threat to attack us. That is not the way that we would strike in an OTH mission going into Afghanistan against ISIS-K targets. For one thing, that will not be a self-defense strike. It'll be done under different. Done under different rules of engagement. So, and we would have a lot more opportunity probably than we had under this extreme time pressure to take a look at the target. To use a phrase that you'll be familiar with, to soak the target with multiple platforms, to have an opportunity to develop extended pattern of life. None of these things were available to us given the urgent and pressing nature of the imminent threat to our forces.
Phil.
Are you considering reparations for the victims here? And what happened with this strike say to you about the over-horizon capability that we've been hearing so much about? What are the risks involved with carrying out strikes when you don't have people on the ground in Afghanistan going forward?
Sure. So as I said in my statement, we are considering ex gratia or reparations for this, and that'll ultimately be a matter for policy. So we're in consultation with the Office of the Secretary of Defense to determine the way forward there. As you will also understand, it's very difficult to reach out on the ground in Afghanistan, to actually reach people. But we are very interested in doing that, and we'll move on it based on our ability to do that. So your question about this and OTH, I'll sort of echo what I said to David. I would reject a parallel between this operation and an over-the-horizon strike against an ISIS-K target. Again, because we will have an opportunity to further develop the target in time, to look at pattern of life. That time was not available to us because this was imminent threat to our forces. It's important that I emphasize that. We did not have the luxury of time to develop pattern of life and to do a number of other things. We struck under the theory of reasonable certainty. Probably our strikes in Afghanistan going forward will be under a higher standard. That's a policy matter, not a purely military matter. But I don't think you should draw any conclusions about our ability to strike in Afghanistan against ISIS-K targets in the future based on this particular strike.
Sylvie.
Hello, General Sylvie Lantom from AFP. You said that you had intelligence about a threat emanating from a white Toyota. So was it this intelligence was not good, or there was another white Toyota which was dangerous and nothing happened from another white Toyota?
So I would tell you this. Clearly, our intelligence was wrong on this particular white Toyota Corolla. At the same time, we undertook a variety of things to make it hard for them to get at us during this period of time. We closed the gates, which we didn't want to do at HKI during this period of time as force protection. We were very active with our ISR overhead, which we know is very, often has a suppressive effect on their activities. We still took rockets the next day, as you know, and they fired those rockets from near Point 1 and from other places actually near the route of this vehicle. But I would tell you unequivocally in this case, clearly the intelligence was wrong on this vehicle. And we certainly regret that, as I've been very clear.
Let me go to the phones. Jennifer Steinhauer, New York Times. Jennifer, you there?
My question's on a different matter, John, for after this.
All right. Okay. Louis Martinez, ABC. You there, Louis? Okay, nothing heard. Nancy Youssef.
Thank you. General, can you clarify a couple points for me? If I'm understanding you correctly, you followed the wrong Toyota Corolla from the beginning in. That is, you weren't following one vehicle and mistaken it for another one. And also, in your initial statement, you said that there was no initial reports of civilian casualties. It appears that there was at least some concern about civilian casualties very early on. So on what basis did you make that statement? And finally, was any of the intelligence that you were using gathered from the Taliban? Thank you.
So let me begin with the last question. Nothing we did was gathered from the Taliban, and I should be very clear about that. We selected this car based on its movement at a targeted area of interest to us, a known targeted area of interest to us, and we held it throughout the day. Clearly, based on the end result, that was a mistake, and I have acknowledged that.
Megan Myers from Military Times. During this time, were you tracking any other suspicious activity in Kabul that might have also been part of this threat? And do you have any intelligence from after this drone strike that suggests what happened to the imminent threat afterward?
Sure. So as I noted in my comments, we had over 60 very, very high caliber reports of imminent threat to our forces in and around Kabul. Typically, those are signals based, but there are also some human and other human intelligence as well. So we had a variety of sources for that intelligence. We believe that the strike we took a couple of days prior up in Nangarhar actually had an effect on quietening down because we got a key attack planner in that strike. We believe that disrupted some of their plans. Additionally, we did things to make it harder for them to get to us. For example, we closed the gates. The gates, as we know, are a particular point where we're vulnerable. So we decided not to process people, and we hunkered down for a little bit of time while this threat was still there. So there were over 60 clear threat vectors that we were dealing with during this period of time, including, as I've noted before, the rocket attacks that occurred, a little bit after this from locations that are displayed on the graphic that you have. Thank you.
A really quick follow-up. Not in terms of the number of threats, but the number of other cars or groups of people that you were following that day. Were you tracking anybody else this closely?
We tracked a lot of other people. We didn't track anybody as closely as we did this because of the limitations on our resources. And frankly, we thought this was a good lead. We were wrong.
Thanks.
Alex.
Thanks, John. General McKenzie, this is Alex Marquardt from CNN. You mentioned that immediately following the attack, you saw shapes in the video that led you to believe that this necessitated an investigation, that there could have been more civilians there. On September 1st, we heard from General Milley, who called this a righteous strike. And this was several days later. Did you, at the time, several days later, also believe that this was a righteous strike? And could you talk about your erosion of confidence over the next subsequent 2 weeks of the investigation?
Sure. So I think we issued a statement from U.S. Central Command about 6 hours after the strike, acknowledging the possibility of civilian casualties. So we knew from the very beginning there was a possibility of civilian casualties. I think we still thought we had good reason to have taken that strike, and it took us gathering the facts to change that. We didn't think, as you will understand and appreciate, we didn't take the strike because we thought we were wrong. We took the strike because we thought we had a good target. It takes a little while to uncover some of those things. We moved and worked as rapidly as we could, and actually I think we worked extremely rapidly to get this information out and to make it public.
Fine.
Thank you, John. Thank you, General. So despite numerous intelligence reports and warnings, on the 26th, we had that tragic attack on the airport. 13 U.S. service members were killed, in addition to tens of Afghan civilians. Again, on the 29th, in this strike, another tragedy took place. As you said, 10 civilians were killed, among them 7 children. Is that a failure of intelligence or leadership in Afghanistan? And what do you intend to do about that? Thank you.
Well, I will tell you, so we had 2 events. We had the attack at Abbey Gate, we had this, and we had this strike. The Abbey Gate attack, you're in combat with an enemy who is alive and has his own will. And sometimes that enemy his plans are just gonna work. You can't cover every eventuality all the time, despite our very best efforts to do that. And we took every precaution we could at Abbey Gate. In fact, when we had threats develop over the 48 hours that followed, as I've noted, we closed the gates in order to, recognizing it would reduce our ability to bring people in, but at the same time, we thought that was the best thing we could do to actually reduce our attack surface, if you will, to protect our forces. There are also a number of attacks that were thwarted. These are 2 that you know about because they're high visibility and we're talking about them. Others were thwarted and did not occur. So the silence of those attacks should mean something too. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to prove the negative.
Tony.
Hi, sir. Tony Capaccio with Bloomberg. 2 quick questions. Are you going to release the report of investigation? 2, in your fact gathering, to what extent did you rely on the New York Times' extensive video investigation and then talks with NGOs or civilian eyewitnesses at the scene?
So repeat the first question again for me.
You'll be releasing the final report of investigation.
The final report the report is a highly classified document. There will be procedures that would have to be followed to declassify elements of that document if it were to be released. And I'll just leave that question there. As we in fact worked our investigation, we used all available sources of information to inform us as we went forward. Certainly that included some of the stuff the New York Times did. It also included our own extensive resources in this area, which we looked at. So we tried to go everywhere we could and not overlook anything as we sort of tried to build a picture.
Taliban at all aid in the investigation or the fact gathering?
No.
Thanks.
Lucas?
General McKenzie, Lucas Thomas.
Right, so we've been listening